All right, one of the things we can do with a database is guarantee the integrity of some of the data by having things like ranges or validation created as a part of the model itself. So the thing that we're going to look at this time is how to add a check constraint on the age. Now you have to be careful when you're creating check constraints that you've really gotten the maximum values. For instance, I worked at US West and they wanted to add a check constraint on names that a person's last name had to be at least 2 letters, when I could go into their data and show them that they had at least 4 people that had a single letter last name. So you do check constraints that violate the nature of the world. And you see this all the time with people that do validation on data where they don't get it right. Email addresses are the worst, like email addresses that don't allow periods in them, when periods is specifically one of those values that if you look at the standard for an email address is in fact allowed. But one thing we can do with a table is we can say we want to add a check constraint, and we're going to do this in a fashion where I actually do it inside the table. Now there's a way to change a table with an alter to add a check constraint. But the first demo we're going to do on check constraints is going to involve making a copy of the table and recreating the table with a check constraint. And there are some advantages to this, but if you have a large table, this is not a practical thing to do. But I want you to see how to create check constraints when you create the table, because that's the most common case for having a check constraint. So we'll do like we did last time, and we're going to alter the table to an old name or to another name, where we take the table, we rename it, then we're going to create a new table that has a check constraint in it. And I think that people's ages has to be between these values. I've done some research, and although there is one person that claimed to be 154, they actually died at 153 in all of human history. Now, when I add this check constraint, this guarantees that those values will be in that range. Then we'll turn around and we'll copy into name list all of the things that we had from the old name list and get our data back. And then we can verify, just like before, that we've actually maintained the data in this table. And the first one is to alter the table to the new table name. And the second one is we want to create the new table. And I'm going to be lazy and cut and paste here. Let's run those two and make certain that they worked. And yes, we have a new empty table with a check constraint. Now we can go and we can do the insert. And it ran that successfully, which means we've copied the data. And at this point, we can check to make certain that we actually have the same amount of data in both tables, that it matched, that we didn't lose any rows. Whenever you make a copy of your data, and you should be doing some accounting to make certain that you still have the data that you're supposed to. And when we do this, we found that we have a count of 11 in both tables, which means now I can just get rid of the old table, the contemporary copy. Now, in the process of this, remember that there may be other things like indexes that you have to also recreate if you're going to do something like this. But at this point, we ought to be able to come over here and just do a select from this. And if we're in PSQL, I can do a describe of the table. That's a \D. And describe it, and notice that it lists as a part of the describe that we have a name list age check, the name of the constraint that I created, and that this is the expression that it runs to validate every row that gets inserted or updated in that table. So that's how you guarantee that certain data values are within range. Now, the next thing we're going to do is a different way of guaranteeing this with a thing called a foreign key. Because if you have a large list of things, it doesn't make sense to create an expression inside the table that maintains values and checks them.